Hello, everyone. Thanks for making it here on this rainy Friday. This is actually the last seminar of the quarter, as we usually skip for the last week of, well, next week we have Thanksgiving, and then we have one more week of classes, so we skip the last week. Although I am doing my book club. For any of you who got the book, you have to read it and show up at the book club that afternoon. Okay, I am delighted to introduce today's guest speaker, Chris Mitchell, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer, CEO of Fehr, which is a very prominent consulting firm, transportation consulting firm in California. And I think it got started just a little bit before I got started in transportation. So I feel like I kind of grew up with Fehr because they were doing really interesting, important work related to my own research when I got started with Jerry Walters. And they started from one little office in Walnut Creek to 17 offices across the country now. So they've just been hugely successful. And I think providing, well, they're unique in the field, I would say, in terms of the kind of work they do and the thoughtfulness of the work that they do. They've also hired a lot of our graduates, which is great. And Chris serves.
Plan to keep doing so.
Yeah, yeah. And Chris serves on the ITS Board of Advisors. So it's just very special to have him here today. And we're going to hear about some of the really interesting work that they're doing at Fehr. So please join me in thanking Chris.
You do a better advertisement for Fehr than I do, so talking about us. No, thank you, and I'm happy to talk more about anything, anything you all want to talk about. When we have Q&A at the end, we'll have plenty of time for that. Happy to talk about consulting or the industry or anything. But for the first part of the presentation here, I want to talk about some work that we've done recently. And the presentation and the talk here today is going to be, I assume, a little less technical than what is normally as part of these sessions. And the reason I want to focus a little bit on, well, first of all, we do a lot of really highly technical work. Everyone here in this room and Fehr and a lot of other consultants too. But what I think we're getting better at, but we haven't as a field done really well historically, is how do we communicate that technical work to the people that are in charge of making decisions and to the public? How do we get the public to understand what some of the trade-offs are, and how do we get the public to understand what the value of things like transit is, and how do we get that in front of decision makers? So what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit of the technical work that we've done, but I'm going to focus on what we found and also how we communicated it out to the public and to the decision makers. And then we're happy to take questions about all of that. So let's just start. This will be no surprise to anybody, I don't think. Transit is struggling in a lot of cities and a lot of locations around the country. Up there, so this is looking at the percentage of pre-pandemic ridership over time from the start of the pandemic. There we're at 100%. Nationally, see, actually I had a little, let's see if I can make this work. Oh, maybe not. I thought I had a little laser light, but I don't. Nationally is right here, so we're sitting about a little under 80% of pre-pandemic ridership. Got a couple of different transit agencies here, so you can see LA Metro, a little bit higher than the national average. The DC Metro WMATA, a little bit higher than the national average, not quite at 100% of the pre-pandemic ridership yet, though. And then look at this one, BART. BART is struggling, 40% of pre-pandemic ridership, 40%. So that's largely due, we'll talk about this in a little bit, largely due to the much higher portion of people that are working from home in the Bay Area, not as much commuting going on. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So that sets the stage, though. Transit is really struggling after the pandemic. And any agency that was reliant on fare box recovery for a large portion of their revenues, the bigger agencies, now doesn't have that same level of revenue coming in. Actually, the smaller agencies that never really relied much on their fare box to generate their revenue, they're actually doing a little bit better right now. So we're kind of focusing on the bigger agencies. So just again, a little bit more background. When the pandemic happened, lots of different stimulus packages and relief packages enacted by Congress. So the first one, the CARES Act, right at the start of the pandemic, when we thought the pandemic might just be 3 to 4 weeks of shutting down and then everyone's going to be back and it's going to be fine. Well, we did this first shot at it, $25 billion lifeline for transit just to keep everybody employed. The next one, the CRRSA, Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, blows off the tongue. 14 more billion for transit. So we had the pandemic lasting longer, more spending. And then when the Biden administration came in, the American Rescue Plan, another 30 billion for transit, which allowed for continued planning, continued capital investment, but importantly, also allowed for operating expenses, because that's where transit agencies were really struggling to just maintain their operations. But that only goes till 2026. And so what we just saw, some of those agencies where the ridership isn't coming back and doesn't look like it's going to be back anywhere close to pre-pandemic levels by 2026, it's the fiscal cliff that we've heard about, right? So 2026, there's a big challenge for transit agencies. And you know, I won't get political here, but it is true that historically, Republican administrations have not been as willing to fund transit investments at the same levels, right? So there's a little concern here about where the money for transit is going to come. So we looked at 3 different case studies. These 3 clients asked us to look at them, one of which actually started before the pandemic. We had to evolve. So we did the study for Washington, D.C. What if transit just went away? What would happen? Similar study we did for BART. What is BART's role in the Bay Area now that we're post-pandemic in the new world? What's the sort of identity crisis for BART? And then some work we did for LA Metro that has turned into some national research. How can the LA Metro, or how can any transit agency, as part of our national research, serve all of our potential customers? So transit systems historically have been built, generally speaking, to serve commute patterns, getting you from your house to your office and getting you from your office back to your house. That doesn't capture all of the people that are using transit. That's a single, and it may have been the majority of riders, but it certainly is not everybody that's using transit. So are we really effectively serving all of those other uses? So we'll talk about each of these. We'll start with the WMATA, the Washington, D.C. Study. What are the benefits of transit in Washington, D.C.? So we took all of the existing technical tools that are out there. So we weren't looking to develop a whole new tool or a whole new model. We were using existing technical tools to try and answer some questions about what would happen if the metro system in DC just disappeared overnight. We looked at a whole bunch of different metrics and we categorized them in 4 different ways. We looked at what is the effect of the Washington metro system on traffic and congestion? What is the effect on just general quality of life? What's the effect on jobs and the overall economy? And then how does the metro system actually affect health and environment outcomes? We categorize each of those into those 4 different categories. Like I said, we use existing technical tools, and then really we put together what we hoped was going to be an effective toolkit to really get some of the high-level nuggets out of all that analysis into the hands, into the eyes of the public and to decision makers. So I know this is really small, and I didn't put this in here expecting that you'd be able to read all this, but what I'm showing in the rest of the presentation here is actually graphics from the report itself, just to give you an idea. This is not some real technical, lots of numbers, lots of detail. This is a high-level graphical. This is what we're trying to get people's attention with. So first thing we did, we defined the study area that we're going to look at. Then we looked at the regional travel demand model. I'll talk about that in just a second. And then from that, the outputs from the travel demand model, some of them were used in an economic model called Treadis, which then takes some of that output and runs through a whole bunch of economic analysis research to figure out what the economic changes would be under certain different conditions. So the travel demand model gave us some of the transportation outcomes, travel patterns, things like that. The Treadis model gave us some of the social benefits and some of the economic impacts. And then we looked at some other data using some other tools. Remix is a tool that helps plan. I'm not sure if anyone here has used Remix. It's a tool that's very graphical, but helps plan for transit routes. And then we used a whole bunch of census data and GIS information to do some additional analysis. So that's how we got each of the four categories of data. Now, I am not going to teach a course on travel demand forecasting today, but I do just want to make sure that at least, I know we've got a lot of different folks here at different levels in your school, so I just want to make sure that we're all at least familiar with the basics of how a travel demand model works. So this is essentially the traditional flow chart for how it works. So you start with a whole bunch of land use data, jobs, residential, housing units, population. And then you say, the first step is called trip generation. So, okay, if there's 100 houses in this zone, how much travel is going to be in and out of that zone for 100 houses? And that's based on surveys that we've done. Okay, how much travel there is in each of the little zones in the model. And then we say, okay, if they're going to generate this many trips, where are they going to go in the area? So maybe those 100 houses are generating 100 trips. And some of them are going to go to the shopping center over here. Some of them are going to go to this office complex over here. Some of them are going to go to the school over here. It's all somewhat proportional, right? So we figure out geographically where they're going to go. Next step, we say, okay, well, now if I know how many people are going from this place to this other place, let's say this housing development over to this shopping center, for example, what mode are they going to use? What percentage of them are going to drive? What percentage of them are likely to take a bike? What percentage of them are likely to take transit, et cetera. And the fourth step of a traditional model says, okay, now I know how many people are going from the housing development over to the shopping center. I know what mode they're going to take. What route are they going to take then? So if I know the people that are driving, what roads are they going to take? People that are taking transit, what bus lines are they going to take? So they have options, right? And maybe when you put all of those trips onto one road, that maybe the shortest distance, that creates congestion. And maybe some people shift over to a different road to avoid some of the congestion. So it's a little bit of an iterative process. I'm guilty, I think we all are, of doing some of that, sometimes avoiding congestion. I confess to when I go up to Tahoe in the winter, I'm one of those people that goes up, sometimes up above on 113 and up just up here, I guess. I'm one of those. So anyway, people figure out a way to avoid congestion and try and take the fastest route. So that's the basics of how a travel demand model works. So we use that tool to help do some of our forecasts here. So one more. Oh yeah, sorry. I should also have noted. We ran the model for 2025. So it's sort of roughly a today condition. It wasn't looking out 20 years in the future. It was a sort of near-term condition. We did some adjustments for the transits. The model is based on a whole bunch of survey data regarding how likely people are to take transit. We made some adjustments to account for the effects of COVID. And then we ran it normally, so with transit, because that's part of the current transportation system. And then we just turned it off. What happens? What is the forecast for how people will travel if there's no transit in the area? So here are some graphics that we put together. So we did all this technical work and we came up with a lot of metrics and a lot of data points. We really broke it up into this. So these are graphics that we put together for the report for the board, the WMATA board. So we've got it sorted into our 4 categories. So the first category, as I said earlier, was traffic and congestion. These are the 4 things that we chose to highlight. So 1.2 million auto trips avoided each day by having transit. So if we turn the transit system off in the model, there's an additional 1.2 million trips per day. That's a lot. Those trips, by not being on the roads, by being on transit instead, save everybody 20-30 minutes on some of the key routes. So one of the residential suburbs into downtown, for example. 20 to 30 minutes are saved with transit. If we were to turn up the transit and build roadways to accommodate all that additional traffic, I wrote it down here, 1,300 additional lane miles of roadways would have to be constructed at the tune of $27 billion. Plus, once all those cars get to wherever they're going, we'd have to spend $2 billion more on parking for all those cars. So $29 billion to build out a roadway system to accommodate all that extra traffic, if you had the space theoretically. Compare that to the cost of operating transit. Transit's a lot cheaper, right? So when we start talking to decision makers about how expensive it is to fund transit, without as many riders as they're used to, well, here's your other option, $29 billion. You got to choose one or the other. unless you want really catastrophic congestion and outcome. So this is how we, just in terms of the cost. Interesting here, this 2 billion in parking. If you took, for the number of parking spaces you would need, you didn't have the Washington metro system, you would have to have, if you've been to Washington DC, you know where the Capitol is at one end of the mall and the Lincoln Memorial is at the other end. You would have that entire thing full of cars, no circulation and driving aisles, just parking, just layer them in as tight as you can, 5 times over that whole area, just to park all the additional cars that you would need to park if you didn't have the metro system in DC. Then the second category, quality of life. Average household savings from riding transit is $2,800. That comes from saving in parking, saving in however else you might commute, Uber, Lyft, or tolls. 250,000 jobs are accessible within an hour, when an hour's ride on transit in the Washington metro area. 50% of all new multifamily rental housing is within the station area in Washington, DC. Half. All the new housing, multifamily housing going in next to stations. So obviously a value that housing developers and people renting housing are placing premium on being near transit. And then $30 million annually of savings just for freight and shipping, right? So as congestion goes up without transit, deliveries and freight gets more expensive too. So it just has a slight circular effect. In terms of jobs, economic benefits, $330 billion of property value in the area is in a station area. A third of $1 trillion, if you think about it that way. $9.4 billion in additional business output just from having transit. So this is coming out of that economic model. So by connecting people better, by creating less congestion, all of the things that transit's been doing in the area is actually contributing an additional almost $10 billion of economic activity just by having transit. 64,000 jobs, it says non-transit jobs, so this means jobs that aren't associated with the transit agency itself. 64,000 jobs are enabled just by having the transit system. Again, it's that proximity and the connections that the transit system is bringing. And $12.2 billion of economic impact from Metro's joint development. So Metro does a lot of development actually. They do land development near their station area, so they own a lot of property. It's generating $12.2 billion of impact to the economy by what they're doing. So if you think about jobs and economy, there's a pretty big impact there too. And again, you're comparing these numbers with the cost of operating the transit system, which is much lower than $12.2 billion. Health and environment, last one, 1.2 metric tons of greenhouse gases avoided by transit in the area. 8 metric tons of fine particulate matter avoided by transit. $950 million, these are annual numbers by the way, $950 million, almost $1 billion in annual savings from crashes that we avoid by having transit. So transit's a safer mode, lower collision rate, less property damage, not to mention lives and injuries, saving $1 billion in property damage. And then 30 minutes daily of additional exercise on average that someone gets when they take transit. If you start commuting by car, if you measure your steps like I do sometimes, and the steps that I drive, the days that I drive, my steps are way down than the days that I take transit. So 30 minutes on average, you get additional exercise. So that's a direct health benefit too. So there's a lot of really useful information there. I think it's helpful to see, to hear some of those things and to understand what a big impact the metro system in Washington has, but also to see some of those things that we skipped over a whole lot of technical analysis and a whole lot of details and a whole lot of that, but that's really to get to the point here for decision makers to understand. So we did something similar in the Bay Area for BART. BART, as you saw earlier, was the one that was really struggling with ridership. So here's something that shows how BART ridership, which is the blue line, has tracked compared to office occupancy in the Bay Area. You can see it's a pretty similar tracking. Right, so the orange line is right about that same 40%. The blue line is. So BART is heavily reliant on commuters, and when the commuters are down, the ridership is down. They track almost perfectly for BART. And here's what BART is facing on the fiscal cliff that we talked about. So before the pandemic, BART was getting about $560 million just from fare bucks from the fares that people are paying. And they were getting another $390 million annually just from ongoing funding, from local sales tax, from the state, from the feds. Then, of course, 2020, the pandemic happened. 2021, a lot fewer riders on BART. The fare box was way down. These didn't change too much, the tax funding measures, but these purple lines or purple bars here is the emergency assistance that BART was getting from the feds, different from the different programs. So this one coming from the feds, the initial one, the green lines were coming from the state, and then this red one is the most recent, the most recent emergency assistance. So you can see that's going to expire in 2029. BART's going to have a big problem. Sorry, I missed, I knew that didn't make sense. 2026 is when the blue expires. This red is the deficit. Sorry. Does that make sense? So that's where BART is looking at the shortfall between 2027 and 2029 and beyond. So this is a big problem for BART. What happens? How they're going to either have to cut service back significantly, which then sends them into a little bit of a spiral, because then it's less attractive, fewer people ride BART because it's less frequent, and it just circles in on itself. So there's a problem with BART. Yeah.
Is this adjusted for inflation? Because I'm seeing by 2029, even without the assistance, you have the value being the same as the
Yes.
2019.
Great question. This is not adjusted for inflation. So what that means is, yeah, thank you for pointing that out. So this, you'll notice that in 2029, without the deficit, you actually have the same amount of revenue coming into BART as you have in 2019. But that's 10 years later through a period of really high inflation. So you can't get as much in 2029 with that same dollar amount as you were able to get in 2019. So it's still a significant problem. It takes that much more just to operate the system 10 years later. Thanks. So one of the things we notice for BART is the ridership profile has changed. So this blue, we rank these from highest to lowest in terms of percent recovery from pre-pandemic. So the blue, evening and weekend trips, these are different types of trips. So from different places to different places in the region. The purple is airport trips by time, weekday, weekend. And then the orange is the commute trips. Those are the lowest. So bright side of this is maybe there's more opportunity here in some of the off-peak trips, the weekend and evening trips. Those are seeming to be the ones that are coming back more. There's a little bit more willingness to get on BART for those, but these commute trips are really struggling. That's where the big impact is found. So here's again, similar type of analysis that we did for WMATA in the DC area that we did for the Bay Area. Looking at some metrics, putting a very high level, getting to a fine point here. So without BART, daily increase of somewhere between 780,000 to 1.5 million miles driven in the Bay Area. Or this equivalent, just here's one point here, just putting some of these big numbers into context for people. So when I talked about the number of parking spaces, 5 times over the Capitol Mall, putting in a frame of reference for people, or this one, that's the equivalent of somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 cars driving from San Francisco to Los Angeles. You want to think about it that way, that's a lot. More time lost in traffic, so these are weekly numbers. So from Antioch to San Francisco, so Antioch is just up here a little bit, 19 hours more a week if you're making that commute. Fremont to Powell Street, common BART trip, 10 hours more. You had to go by car. Same thing with Walnut Creek to Montgomery Street, 8 hours more per week. From 19th Street to 16th Mission. So that makes it personal for people. Hey, I actually do. I've done this one quite a bit personally. 10 hours more if I had to drive it instead of taking BART. That's a lot more per week. That's 2 hours a day, right? An hour each way. That's significant. And then here's another way we looked at it. BART connects you to destinations that matter. So we use GIS to look at how big of an impact does BART have in terms of connectivity. 2.5 million jobs, or 67%, 2/3 of all jobs in the Bay Area are either within a 15-minute walk of a BART station or a transit route that connects directly to a BART station, right? 2/3 of the Bay Area jobs. 61% of Bay Area residents, almost 5 million people, and then 3,400 schools, parks, and libraries. So almost 60% of all of the schools, parks, and libraries are within a 15-minute walk of BART or a route that connects directly to BART. So it has there's a lot of connectivity there that would be lost without BART. And then lastly here on the BART study, we really tried to then do more to personalize this. So all those numbers are mind-boggling sometimes, and thinking about wow, 2,000 cars driving from San Francisco to LA, that's a lot. I can kind of get that, but it's still just a number. We tried to put some stories here, some actual stories, some actual people that are taking BART and talking about the value that it brings to them. It's a little bit of advertising, sure, but it does serve to make this a reality for decision makers. These are actually real people that are affected by BART in a good way, that would not have access to the same level of transportation that they do now. So this one I thought was really good. As a writer, if BART didn't exist, I would feel trapped in one town without any options to really get anywhere without putting in a lot of effort, planning, mapping, research, and risk, trying to think about how to get around. So it just makes it easy. Right? So some pictures, high level, just high level bullet points. And then we wanted to broadcast that, or BART, I should say BART did. So BART, this is something that BART provided to their board. The report, you saw it very graphics intensive, but it had the key points really bold, and then in stations to try and really communicate to the public that's already riding BART, but just to make sure they understand how important BART is to the region so that they can continue to advocate for transit on their behalf. So that was the BART one. Third project, LA Metro. So this one actually started before the pandemic. It's a little bit different from the first two. LA Metro, I was shocked to learn this, that LA Metro does not, and most transit agencies are in the same category. They don't have any data. They have all sorts of ridership data. So they know who's riding, who's getting on at what station, and who's getting off at what station. They know how many people are riding each route. They don't have any demographic data on percentage of people that are men, women, income, any sort of demographic information. So one of the challenges in planning a system is we all know, or it's safe to assume, I think, that the transit system being designed many years ago, designed to serve commute populations, and many years ago, that was predominantly male. It was really designed around a system that was only, not only, but predominantly needing to serve the needs of male commuters. And for right or for wrong, you know that women tend to have more responsibilities of household responsibility, so errands, childcare, things like that. And so LA Metro wanted to understand, hey, is our system really set up to serve everybody and maybe the different needs that different populations might have? So we started to study with them just to understand how women travel and try and, for the first time, understand, are there some differences in how women use transit and how men use transit? And is the transit service actually serving both equally? So it's actually 3 different studies here within this effort. So the first one was with LA Metro, as I was just talking about, understanding how women travel. So it's a big data collection effort. We just want to understand how women travel. The second one then, once we have all the information, we want to come up with an action plan. What can we do to make it better for women and to make sure that everybody's getting served equally? And then TCRP had a project where they wanted to take that national and look and expand that and see, are there any lessons that LA Metro learned that we can then apply nationally to different transit agencies? So I want to talk a little bit about each one of these. So start with just some of the key findings from the data collection, the How Women Travel study. I will caveat that this was done before COVID. So some of these have changed slightly, but the general trends are still the same. So more women ride public transit than men. So we're just talking about 50, 60 years ago, that would have been a lot different. Serving commute patterns that tended to be more male. Now, more women are riding transit than men. 51% of rail riders are women, 54% of bus riders are women in the LA region. And the share of female transit ridership continues to grow, while the share of male ridership is decreasing. So more and more women are starting to ride transit, fewer and fewer men. 90% of female riders use the system more than 3 days per week. So they're regular riders. 74% of women's trips are under 10 miles, a little shorter. And 57% of female riders with children are bringing their kids on transit. That creates a whole different set of challenges, right? How do you put strollers and how do you are the seats designed for kids, that kind of thing. So a lot of really interesting information on that. Then we did some surveys. We actually talked to people. We were talking earlier before the presentation here about how we do outreach and what are we, the different ways that we do it. We tried a lot of different ways to try and get different groups of women. We tried to make sure that we weren't just getting people that were currently on the system. We talked to a lot of people that don't ride transit to try and figure out what are their challenges, what are their barriers too. So the largest barrier for everybody is I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe riding transit. 60% of female riders feel safe during the day, which isn't great, but it's more than half at least. And then, but only 20% feel safe at night. So that's a big issue. The top changes that would make current and previous transit riders, female transit riders, feel safer. For the people that are, for the women that are currently riding transit, having transit police nearby was the top concern. Having better lighting was the second, and just having other people nearby was the third. For previous female riders, so women who used to ride transit but who don't ride it anymore, having other people nearby was the highest. Security cameras was the second highest, and lighting was the third highest. So fairly similar between those two groups. Here's some other findings on the station stop and vehicle design. Is there something about the way vehicles are designed in the stations that are giving different outcomes? I thought this one was really fascinating. The fact that I thought it was fascinating is maybe part of the issue here, right? I'm a man. I don't experience some of the things that we're finding out about, right? And so for me, what seems like, oh, interesting, for a woman, that's like, no, this is my life every day. So as our industry gets more and more diverse, both from gender, from race perspectives, we're gonna actually, I hope, do much better at understanding the needs of a lot of different riders and different users, because we'll have all those perspectives in the room when we're planning some of these things. But women were less likely than men to agree that transit was comfortable, or that they had space for their items. Women tend to travel with more bags, carts, and strollers, again, because they tend to have more household responsibilities. Again, for right or for wrong, that's the reality. And over 80% of complaints related to strollers are made by women. So women are feeling like there's not space for their strollers. They're carrying too much. It's not convenient or comfortable. Whereas men, all you have is a briefcase, and you fit that in there, it's not too bad. Many female riders had trouble reaching the stop cables and buttons from the seated position. So this picture up here illustrates that. You got your kid, your stroller, maybe some grocery bags, and the cable is way up high. So just simple things like just the way the vehicle is designed, probably by a man, didn't have all that experience to think of when they designed it. So these are really important pieces of information to get out there so that we can start to address it. Here's some more findings here. So I thought this was interesting too. Women are more likely to travel during the midday. So what we see here on the weekday, the sort of purple lines, the morning commute, about the same. But once you get in the middle of the day, women are making more trips than men. So again, is that off-peak household responsibilities, and the same thing on the weekend. Where throughout the course of the day, females are making more trips on transit than men, particularly in the middle of the day. So in a transit system that's designed for commuters, primarily a ton of service in the morning peak period, ton of service in the evening peak period, lower service levels during the middle of the day. Well, women are making more trips than men, so that impacts women more than it does men. So I know this is small, and the intent was not that you could all read every word on here, but this is the action plan that we came up with for LA Metro. With all that data, we developed this. So this is a nice thing that goes into their strategic plan. It talks about all the different strategies. It's a time frame for how, implementation time frame, and what the levels of effort for implementing each of these is: low, medium, or high. And you'll notice they're categorized here. So we've got safety practices here. I'll come back to the safety strategies, station stop and vehicle design, and fare policy strategies. I won't go through each one of these, but I'll just a couple I'll highlight. So the first one here is a gender analysis tool. So this was a kind of an all-encompassing framework or a philosophy of every time that LA Metro does something, adding a route, cutting a route, making a change to their vehicle design, they're going to go through this tool and really make sure that they're deliberately thinking about, is what we're doing having a different impact to men or to women? Is it, or is it about the same, right? So really being thoughtful about that. You see all the stuff here that we talked about earlier: safety on the safety front, camera, visibility and lighting, station stop design, gender-specific operator training. Talking about some real world scenarios that come up, making sure that the operator knows how to handle different situations. On the station stop and vehicle design here, strollers, that was a big one. Making sure that there's room allocated for strollers, that people understand what the policies are for strollers, making sure that's more comfortable, improving the interiors, making them more comfortable. what's not shown here, but I think was actually one, oh, this is good. I like this one, implementation of fare capping. So the idea behind fare capping is you pay your transit fare every time you get on a bus or on a train or whatever. But women, because they're making more trips on transit than men, tend, generalize here, men are generally traveling from home to work, and then from work to home, 2 transit trips. Women might have to go to work, to drop the kids off to school, then go to work, come back, pick up the kids, go to the grocery store, go to the doctor's appointment, and then go home. There's a lot more trips that they're taking. So the fare capping policy was the idea that once you've reached a certain limit on fares for the day, the rest of the day is free. So you don't have to pay a new fare every time you go to the doctor's office and then go back home from the doctor's office with your kids. That was a big barrier for parents, for women. So those are some of the strategies. And then TCRP here picked up some of that and tried to take this nationally. How might this apply nationally? We saw some big differences across the country when we were looking at it and did a whole survey of different transit agencies. Really, right now, only the relatively large, pretty urban transit agencies are even looking at this. This is something that is new. So shockingly, it's new, but it is. And only a few agencies are really looking at it. And the ones that are doing it in a very different context with better resources, frankly, than other agencies. There are still some important similarities, though. This is key. The constraints for those agencies that aren't doing it, the resource constraints. It's not necessarily because they don't care. A lot of the agencies just don't have the resources to do it. And to do it at the level of robustness that an agency like LA Metro. And then many of the challenges at the same time, many of the challenges that women face are really similar across regions. So some of the strategies that we can come up with for LA Metro and for some of these other agencies have some applicability to other agencies. We just need to make sure that they're right size. Yeah. So a couple takeaways here. That's where we are right now. So this is an ongoing project. We're developing that gender toolkit, similar to what I just showed you that we did for LA Metro. We're doing that for TCRP. That's a more national toolkit for agencies to choose from, making sure that they have a scalability to them so that smaller agencies can feel like they have some way to implement some of these strategies and they're not just designed for large agencies. Making sure that the toolkit acknowledges that there's different contexts. A smaller agency might have some different issues than a larger agency, and then prioritize some of the low-hanging fruit that agencies can do, particularly agencies that are strapped for cash, which is a lot of them. What are some things that you can do that's easy to implement, relatively low cost, but higher impact? So we're focusing here on the data collection right now and communicating that with some community engagement. I went that earlier. We're about to get into planning and implementation stage, and then helping to set policy and standards. So that's it. I hope that's helpful. Again, the idea here is there's a lot of analysis behind this, but I think as an industry, if we can do a better job of doing, communicating very clearly and concisely in some of the visual things that we do, we can actually get people's attention and hopefully help agencies make better decisions. So that was helpful. So how do we do?
Great.
Good. We got plenty of time for questions here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you talk about BART, and one thing I read up on and studied is that pricing schemes can really lead to incentive issues with ridership.
Mm-hmm.
So when you compare BART to New York MTA,
Mm-hmm.
MTA has the option to pay for the all you can ride for a whole month. It's it's $130. You can ride as much as you want.
Yep.
In San Francisco, you pay per platform that you pass,
Yeah.
distance.
Yeah.
Why isn't a monthly pass an option?
Why don't they do that? There's probably a lot of reasons. I think it would just be really expensive. I'm not trying to justify what BART has done because I'm sure I'm sure that's a question they get a lot. My guess is that it's the cost structure right now is so varying depending on how far you travel that the cost of a monthly pass, there might be some equity issues in terms of people that are making shorter trips that currently only pay a certain amount, and then people making longer trips that are paying higher. where do you set the monthly pass at to normalize it for all of them? So that's my best guess, but someone in this room might actually have a better answer, but I don't know why they don't. I think a lot of agencies do. I know SFMTA has that, and I think VTA and the South Bay has that as well.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you. It's really cool to have a CEO of a firm talking to us. I think that's really eye-opening. I think you might be the first CEO I've ever met. That's pretty cool. But I just want to ask, the strategies from Fehr and Pierce to have inclusive and equitable transportation planning.
Yeah.
Like you talked about for considering women when it comes to public transit and their safety. Is that possible because of the more equitable transportation workforce that's coming into the industry, such as into Fehr and Pierce, and really just feeling appreciated so that they can then give their perspectives on how they approach this from a planning perspective or an engineering perspective?
I think so, yeah. I think these are questions that 50 years ago, nobody was asking because it was all men sitting around a room planning this out, and not, I'm a man, so nothing against men, but that's one perspective. I don't have all the experience that everybody has riding transit, and so if I'm just sitting around people that are just like me, our experience and our perspectives might be very similar and be not really fully understanding what other people's experience are. So as the industry gets more diverse, we're going to get better outcomes, I think, and more attention paid to things like that. And I feel the same way about Fehr and Pierce. It's important to us too, to make sure that we're getting a diverse workforce, but same reasons, to make sure that the recommendations we're giving to clients is informed by a lot of different experience. And we were talking earlier about the importance of doing public outreach. So a lot of the projects that we work on, we have a lot of technical expertise and a lot of know-how at Fehr and Pierce, but we don't necessarily, if we're coming into a neighborhood that we haven't worked in before, that we don't live in, we might not know what the actual day-to-day experience is. So we got the technical know-how, but we might not know the full experience. So having good public outreach and really hearing from a lot of the different voices in the neighborhood about what it's like, we pick up on all sorts of things that we wouldn't have otherwise known. So all of that kind of works together. It's really important. Thank you.
How are these studies funded?
Great question. So the agencies themselves fund it. So BART funded it, WMATA funded their study, LA Metro funded their study, and then TCRP is a federally funded project.
And then do you see any sort of return on investment for not pro bono, but doing sort of like activism type? Like this seems like it's sort of you're pushing policymakers to make certain decisions that then they can fund projects that you work on.
Yeah.
Does that work out that way?
Inadvertently, I guess. I mean, I think I see what you're saying. We have to be very careful, I believe, as consultants, to not get into the advocacy world too far. We all might have our perspectives on how the world should work or what would be good policy, but we have credibility as consultants because clients respect that what we're bringing to them is fact-based and that it's researched and there's some data behind it. So we tend to really try hard not to come in with a preconceived notion of what the outcome should be. Because if the client knows that every time Fehr and Pierce comes in the room, they're going to recommend a roundabout, then when we do recommend a roundabout, they're going to say, okay, only of course, we saw that coming. So we really try to make sure that our analysis is objective, but that it's grounded in reality. So all of these things are true. BART and WMATA, we're looking, they help us understand what the value is in this region. Well, here it is. You can decide what to do with that. But this is the answer. We got paid for this work, so I don't, it's not, it wasn't designed so that, we can get some other follow-on work on it, other than we just hope we did a good enough job that they say, hey, that was really a good experience working with Fehr and Pierce. We want to work with them again. But not necessarily, I guess we do have some vested interest in making sure that transit agencies are viable and have money to do studies, sure. But that wasn't the main intention for that. They hired us because they thought that we would be the right people to both to do the technical work, but also communicate it.
Can I do a
Yeah.
follow on?
Yeah.
And then we'll get back to the other questions. So staff hires you.
Yep.
And then part of your audience is the board of these agencies. but I feel like your message needs to go way beyond that.
Yes, yeah. Some of these are publicly facing too, like, so
Yeah.
for that BART study, there were some billboards in BART. And for example, the BART board, staff at BART hired us, BART board authorizes the contract, and BART board reviews the outcome. But BART board is already convinced that they should have funding, right?
Yes.
BART board is all in on
Right,
BART, right?
right.
So to your point, yeah, that goes to, maybe it goes to a state senator, or maybe it goes to a county board of supervisors, whoever is maybe potentially gonna be able to get some funding for BART, that gets in front of them, gets in front of the governor maybe, or something like that.
Thank you. This was really interesting presentation, definitely a good to think about a lot of different facets of this. This is a bit of a departure of what you talked about, but I'm curious with this lower ridership post-transit, with also fiscal cliffs that various agencies are facing in the next few years. I'm curious in terms of bringing back ridership, do you think it's more important for transit agencies to be putting money into their existing services or trying to expand service?
Great question. That's the debate going on right now, isn't it? Should we be spending money on capital improvements when we don't have anywhere near the riders? How do we get the riders we have? I don't know that there's a universal answer to that question. A lot of it is going to depend on the agency. Some of the challenges that different agencies have are different. I guess this is just my personal opinion. So I struggle to see the benefit of major investments in a lot of cases right now for agencies that are struggling to operate. Because not only does it cost a lot of money to build some capital improvement, but then you've got to that's more maintenance and operations costs going on. And if you already can't operate the system you got, what are you going to do down the road? So the flip side to what I just said though is we're talking about capital improvement projects in some cases that are going to have, not be done for 15, 20 years and that are going to have a 100-year lifespan after that. We can't stop planning for the future now, just because right now we're in a little bit of a unique period in history, and that things will probably come back, particularly in 20 years. That's the flip side of this. That's totally valid too. So it's a tricky one. I will say just a couple other points on that. And maybe some of you have heard this statistic, but I live in San Francisco, and while overall ridership on Muni, which is the transit agency in San Francisco, overall ridership is down. Primarily, Muni is designed to, again, one of those commute to downtown. So a lot of the routes and the light rail lines take you from the residential areas of the city into downtown. But there's also quite a few routes that operate across town and don't ever go downtown. The routes that go downtown, ridership is like 50%, maybe even less than what it was before the pandemic. But some of the crosstown routes is like 150%, much higher ridership than before the pandemic. And so agencies are having to rethink how they allocate some of their resources. Maybe they just, maybe there is some opportunity now to get more riders on some of the other routes that are not just traditional.
And there's a little bit of a funding pot
Yes.
problem with this question too, right? Yeah,
And
I mean, there's money for capital
yeah, oh, I see what you're saying.
that's
Yes.
separate from
Yes.
operating.
That's true. That's exactly right. One of the things that we have been advocating for, and I say advocating for and trying to help our clients, is to get something. I think, how deep do I want to go with this? The way that a lot of local transportation improvements are funded is through what's called vehicle impact fees or development impact fees. So when you want to develop a housing development or you want to build an office building or whatever it is, the city's done a study that says, here's how much capital investments we want to make over the next 20 years. Here's your share of that. And so when you build your part of it, you pay your share towards the improvements. And that can only go towards capital improvements. Well, some of that, if some of that were able to be used for operations and maintenance, you could actually get maybe a better operations in the near term. So we're working with some of the state legislators to try and get that either clarified or at least loosened up a little bit so that some agencies can use some of that for operations. But it does get into this weird, the way the laws work are kind of Byzantine, and some money can be used only for capital and some only for operations. doesn't give agencies the flexibility they need sometimes over time to do what their most urgent need is.
So, especially if you look at the transportation landscape for regional transport, to consider Sacramento and Los Angeles, one of the option could be to fly, and the other option could be to drive and do a bunch of other things.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, there's a gap that exists in bus transportation in terms of regional bus transportation. There are players like Flex and Mega, which filed for bankruptcy recently. There is conversation of investing a lot of money in high-speed rail, which would service to nodes, lesser nodes when compared to regional bus agency would do. Do you think there is a need for states in the US outside California or Texas or Florida who have a lot for states to think about a regional long distance public bus transportation system? Because while you were showing the slides for DC particularly, there are a lot of counties that were mentioned, which are from Virginia as well as from Maryland. And there's a lot of throughput from the cities which are around, which ultimately contribute to the freeway traffic congestion. So, I mean, that's just a random thought I have, because that's a space I think is a bigger blind spot that exists probably, which is something you found in the US.
It's kind of like the local version of that, if I'm hearing you right, the local version of that is BRT versus light rail.
Yeah.
Right, so the BRT is a lot cheaper,
That's
bus, but it serves the same function as the light rail.
Yeah.
But it has a little more flexibility. So would we be better off funding a really high frequency bus network for long distance travel than high speed rail? I think the only challenge with it, particularly in a state like California, is that the time competitiveness is not as good with the bus. As the idea of high speed rail is that it is still a little bit longer than the plane trip, but it's a little more competitive in travel time. But the bus would still be, we're still looking at like an 8-hour drive from here to LA, which is, it's probably not going to be as desirable for most travel. But one thing we have seen a lot more is commuter buses. So like in Colorado, there's they call it the bus stang. It goes from Fort Collins down to Denver, which is like a couple-hour drive. So it's primarily, or an hour and a half or something. It's primarily for commuters. It goes every day, but the drive is so long that people don't want to drive it, so they get on the bus stang and they can commute. So that's one thing that I have seen. But
Private or public?
it's public. It's funded by CDOT, the Colorado Department of Transportation.
Great.
Yeah.
When you talked about the example of Mala and Bart, when you talked about how much job that transit, well, with this scenario of having transit and not having transit, the difference in the jobs that's are enabled by transit, when you have the number, did you take account to the travel time of trying to get from destination to the job site? Or, and also, when you mentioned large connectivity, when you mentioned, with BART, the bus system, like the transit system are connected to the major BART stations. Like, again, like, is the travel time considered in that, when you produce that number of how many jobs that's enabled and accessible by?
Yeah, so that's an economic analysis out of that. So we did the travel demand model, and then it fed into this economic model that I have to admit was developed by another teaming partner that we brought on as part of our team that were economists, and it's called Tretis. And it basically takes the output from the travel demand model, travel time and volume of trips and where they're going, and it has a whole bunch of economic data that's built into it, and so it runs it through and forecasts what the effect economically is. So I can't speak to a lot of the details about that model, but I can tell you that it did take into account the travel times in its calculations. Yeah, there's another question. Yeah.
I really appreciate the kind of human-centric focus on showing the impacts of transit.
Yeah.
And I guess one question I had for that is that often that kind of visual communication isn't necessarily taught in school.
Yeah.
Were there lots of staffing, like training that you had to do, or did you have to like go outside of Fehr and Fears to recruit people to like make the graphics and the designs?
Great question. There are, it's not taught in engineering and planning schools so much, but there's plenty of graphic design programs, and so we hire people that are really good at that, and that have some specialty training in graphic design. And so we have to work, you know, it's some of them have a really good knowledge of transportation, others don't. So we have to make sure that we're helping them understand what the messages we're trying to get across. But you would not want me trying to develop any graphics like that. Yeah, so we've 20 years ago, when I started at Fehr and Fears, 25 years ago, we didn't do anything like that. And there were some firms that did a better, frankly, much better job than we did in that, but we put a focus on it because of this, you know, the ability to do all the great work in the world, but if you can't communicate it, get people's attention, it doesn't have as much benefit. So we've and our clients are expecting it because that's what they want to be able to communicate to the public or to decision makers. So we've hired people that specialize in graphic design.
Very cool. It's cool to see where that graphic came from. I really liked it when Fart debuted that.
Yeah.
The one where the cars just swinging around the bridge.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's some cool, it's a huge part of communicating to the public. Something, so much of what we do, you know, my background is as a civil engineer. And one of the reasons I got into this field was because I loved the intersection of the science and the technical work with the social part of what we do. The people in the way that affects people's lives is a great way. So be able to communicate that to people is great. No, I'm so glad that there are structural engineers in the world, believe me, but they don't have this, they don't need to communicate their work to the general public. And so they have one field of engineering, but our job is really double, right? We have to do the technical work and make sure that it's technically rigorous, but also be able to communicate that to a non-technical audience.
And do you have evidence that it's working, or do you try and figure out if it's working? Or do you have anecdotal evidence at least?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you were just talking about someone was doing some outreach here at UC Davis for some planning work. And I think the evidence is that we're getting input from people and they're participating in that. And we'll see if in the next couple of years, if there's more funding for BART and for WMATA, we'll see. But yeah, I think it is working. It's catching people's attention. Those billboards, you know, those wouldn't have been put up if it was just a real technical report written in Word. So I think it's working. It's hard to measure.
Yeah, it is hard to measure. Very fair question. Yeah.
Okay, so I know you said your job was in advocacy, but I'm still gonna sort of ask you a fair question. So when you did that economic analysis of the transit, no transit, it just made me think how crazy it is that we don't do that all the time for understanding what the true cost of transit is. And it made me just feel like how weird it is that we're trying to look at fare box recovery as something that should ideally fund transit, because it's kind of treating it essentially like it's a household problem, when really this is like an economics thing where suddenly costs just means something totally different. So I was wondering how that was received, if it helped people understand the situation in a different way. Like, I was just curious, what was the response to that? Did people find it helpful, or?
Yeah, people found it helpful. I think what it did in a lot of cases was I think people fundamentally get that there's an economic benefit to transit. I think people fundamentally get that it helps congestion. People get that, but the magnitude of it is
Surprising to them.
Yeah, that puts it in, or the cost, the magnitude of the cost for building all that parking, all that new road that you would have to build. That's, you know, 5 times over the entire Capitol Mall of cars parked, just in addition to what we have now. Those stories and those anecdotes, I think, help get people's attention and put a fine point on what I think people deep down they get. It clarifies for them.
And thank you for your great presentations. You mentioned that you want to consider some information about people. For example, we want to focus on the gender of people who want to use this public transportation. But I was thinking if we consider these, can affect the reality of the system. For example, if you just focus on women for your public transportation, for example, it can affect the activities that we need to do in our system. For example, in the mornings, in the peak time, it's possible that women cannot go to outside for example, going to work, but for example, men decided to go. But I think if we just consider one gender or one specific group and build our system based on this concept, I think can make some bias in our systems. I want to know how you fix this bias in your systems, in your plans for your transportation system.
Yeah, I think it's it's just awareness that a more diverse workforce in our industry, whether it be at the consultant level, whether it be at the agency staff level, whether it be in academia, more diverse, not just gender, but racially and all sorts of diversity. The more diverse the people that are designing the systems are, the better and more the better the system is going to be to serve a diverse group of people. So I think part of it is just having more diversity in the workforce. We're doing better at that, but we still have some room. And then part of it is just awareness of the fact that we might not know all the answers, and let's do a study to figure out. Maybe, I don't think any of us thought this would happen, but maybe we do this study and find out, yeah, they're about the same. Women and men travel about the same. We're good. Well, at least we've looked at it and we've tested it. So I just think more awareness and making sure we're thinking about different ways and different needs that different people might have is the way to do that. Yeah. Yeah, great questions. Yeah.
He's kind of out of left field, but you mentioned, you live in the Bay Area and you ski. Have you ever heard of the Snowball Special?
Is that the bus that goes?
It was like a train in like the 1930s that went from Oakland to Sugar Bowl.
Oh.
And it would leave at like
Yeah.
12:15 in the morning and get to and like leave Sugar Bowl at 4 p.m. in the afternoon and go back to the Bay Area. But if that was this is some like weird transportation question, but if for skiers, like if that was an option for you, would you take it instead of having to drive the 4 hours?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So does anybody ski in Colorado? Has anyone taken the ski train? So the ski train, and this is another one that's public, it's funded by CDOT, by the Colorado Department of Transportation. And I just heard that they got more funding, so they're actually gonna expand it. But it's an Amtrak train and they do it on the weekends when the cars they're not using all the cars. So basically an Amtrak train that's funded by CDOT, and it leaves from Union Station in downtown Denver and goes up the train. It's the same route that goes from Oakland. What's the route that goes from Oakland to Chicago? It goes through here.
Oh, the Zephyr.
The Zephyr, yeah. So it's on the same route, and it goes from Denver up to Winter Park Ski Resort, which is about a 2-hour train ride. And it literally drops you off at this, like you walk off the train into the lodge, basically, of the ski resort. You can leave your stuff on the train. If the train stays there all day, you go and you ski, and you come back and the train is waiting, and then you can take the train back home. It's great, and it's full every weekend, and every time you go down, they remind you what the travel time is on I-70. That's the competing way. It's great. So
I think you can take the train to Truckee.
you can,
It's just that-
But it leaves at
then
7.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Then
But related to that, you did mention that you use transit.
I do, yes.
And I guess I'm wondering or want to tie that back to your point about, kind of diversity of the workforce. And I feel like, we have a lot of decision makers who never get on trains.
Yeah, right.
Who are making big decisions about transportation. So I don't know. I guess I'm asking you to comment on the importance of you actually being a transit rider
Yeah.
for the work you do.
And I will confess that I don't take transit as often as I used to. I used to take it every day, but my commute was the same every day. And so now with my current role, I'm kind of all over the place. But when I can, I take transit. And I think it's really important. I think it's important that once in a while I ride a bike around the city. I think it's important that I walk, and just because of what I do. Not necessarily my role in the company, but as a transportation professional, I think it's important that we understand how the different modes work and I guess I won't stand up here and say it's important that everybody drive, but you know, at least understanding how traffic works and what the issues are is important. If you're gonna be making recommendations for how something should work, you should at least use it once in a while, I think, if you can.
And then we still have a few minutes. Still time for questions, but we'll ask you a question. Then I want you to talk about parent peers and UC Davis. Yep, and the work you've been doing here.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, sorry. So this question is also inspired by the billboards and like the marketing.
Yeah.
Do transit agencies place a large emphasis on marketing or just like kind of communicating or even just like making people aware of it and kind of maybe changing preconceived notions about transit? And then like, do those marketing strategies have any impact on ridership?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, transit agencies do advertise, some more than others, but they do. You know, sometimes you'll see it up in the Bay Area, I'll see an ad for BART on TV once in a while talking about, you know, the benefits of riding BART.
And their BART sweaters.
Yeah,
right?
exactly,
That's
exactly.
advertising.
That's right, exactly. Need to get one of those BART Christmas sweaters. But yes, they do. I actually don't have any data on whether they've measured the effect directly on, you know, they finish an advertising campaign and then measure ridership afterwards to see if there's been a change. I actually don't know. I assume that there's some, at least belief that they're effective, but I don't know if anyone's actually measured.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Sorry.
More questions. Good.
Wondering for the LA Metro Gender Action Plan, the strategies, are they already published?
yes, yeah, you can go to LA Metro's website
And did they start adopting those strategies already?
they have, yeah. I know that the gender action tool that I talked about, sort of the framework for decision making is something that they're using, and some of the other strategies have been adopted. I don't know exactly which ones have and haven't, but I know that they've started.
And I mean, you mentioned that LA Metro started looking at the women's travel trend in 2019 and hope to improve the transit system. Is that somehow was correlated with the Olympic Games or the big thing going on?
Yeah, great question. So this was not prompted by the Olympics in LA, but some of the strategies are certainly going to be in place in time for the Olympics, and there's a push down there to get them. That's driving a lot of things down there. So we're doing some of the planning for the Olympics with LA Metro as well, and there's this huge push. This 4 years is not a long time to get anything built in California, and so there's a big push right now to get things moving so that it can be ready for the Olympics. But that looks, a lot of those strategies will be part of that and they'll be in place.
Yeah, so kind of continue on Ayesh's question, like, because so one of the primary ways I actually know about some transit systems is by like, for example, I'll search a trip on Google Maps and then it will show like, these are like the series of transits that I need to take and transfer in order to get there. And oftentimes it has like the accurate, you know, like time, or maybe sometimes it's a little bit delayed, but it will show it. And it will sometimes often even show like the fare for the tickets. I wonder like how this communication work between like transit agencies and also Google Maps and other mapping services, and is there any way we can improve it? Like, for example, I noticed that the fare is not always available. It's available for like some bigger agencies like BART, but then it's not available for like smaller, you know, regional transit agencies. Like, I wonder how we can work on, you know, improving this communication between the mapping companies and the transit agencies, and how this can serve as a way of marketing the transit agencies.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think now that so much information is in GIS and that it's all electronic, it's a lot easier for agencies to share information with Google, and some agencies are reluctant to share because they're afraid. I don't know if this is exactly why what you're talking about. Some agencies don't have the fare in there. I don't know if this is why, but one reason might be some agencies for right or for wrong are reluctant to share information with a private company like Google because they're afraid if they change their fares, or if they feel like they're locked in. So if they do something different and Google has bad information, Google doesn't have the most updated information, then their customers are going to get mad at the agency. And so it's sort of a defensive, I don't want to get in trouble with people. Yeah, maybe if there were some I'm not advocating for this, but if there were some rule that all of this information had to be public and just, open source, then Google would be able to have all of it. Agencies, when they would update it, would just automatically update.
Yeah, the fair is pretty interesting because like you can actually look at their fair like on the website and it's like the most recently updated, but this information is not on Google Maps. So it's not that they're not doing the electronicizing their fair on time. It's just that they're not sharing this with Google.
Yeah. So that, I mean, that would have to be, if some agents aren't willing to do it, in order for that to happen, there could be some legislation that required them to do that. Again, I'm not advocating for or against that, but that would be what we could. Yeah, sounds, yeah.
Well, unless they're pressing questions, we'll let you off the hook after you tell us a little
Okay,
bit
sure.
about Fehr and Pierce's work with UC Davis.
Sure, so we've done, first of all, as we said earlier, we have a lot of UC Davis grads that work for us. A lot of them, we have offices here in downtown Sacramento and in Roseville. In total, we've got about 45 people in the region doing transportation planning and engineering here in the Yolo County, Sacramento area. So the work that we do for UC Davis, we've been working here for a long time, decades. Fehr has been around since 1985, so we're our 40th anniversary next year. I don't know when we first started working with UC Davis, but it's been at least 25 years, because I know when I started, we were working on some of the roundabouts that are here. So we've done all sorts of different things. So there's the planning for the roundabouts that are out here. We do some long range planning for the university, where the university says, hey, we want to, and this is what we're going to look like in 20 years. What do we need to think about in terms of transportation infrastructure, bike parking, bike routes, that kind of stuff? What do we need to do to get permits for all of that on the transportation side? Down to the very, very granular. Where can we locate bike racks along this corridor that's going to be most strategic, or where do we need to have parking kiosks or something like that? So it really runs the gamut, from the long range planning to the here and now nitty gritty. And we, like I said, we've been doing it for a long time. So who has said they were going to manage or help work on the travel survey? Yeah, so you're working on the travel survey. So some of the work that some of you all are working on, the travel survey for the university, is really helpful for us to help figure out how to help the university plan for its transportation in the future. By understanding how people are traveling today, and the survey is a really great way to do that. We can help the university make better decisions. So thank you for doing that.
Right, anything, last thing? All right, last one.
Okay, so I know Fehr and Pierce is primarily West Coast, right?
Yes.
But
Primarily.
there's two on the East Coast? Correct?
Yeah, so outside of the very West Coast, so like Washington, Oregon, California, we've got offices in Salt Lake City, Denver, Dallas, Orlando, and Washington, DC.
Oh, wow, okay. And is there like expansion going on, or, okay.
Yeah, so we open it's not a rule, but historically we open a new office in a new geographic location maybe once every 2 or 3 years. And we're looking at a couple right now. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, thank you so
Yeah, my
much.
pleasure.